What's good, everybody? I'm Mac, and I'm back with another video here. This is a little bit of a different video that I'm going to be making here. As about a month ago, I made a community post. I don't know if you've seen it right here, but I made a community post basically just at the top of my head, just listing the most irrelevant teams when it comes to sports, at least in my opinion. And so I began to think about it a little bit more, and it prompted me to kind of make this, just in my opinion, right here. I am going to rank every MLB team, in my opinion, when it comes to their relevancy. Now, a couple of things. This isn't about how they've been over a certain period of time, and I'm not judging them solely on that. I'm just, well, it kind of is, but I'm also going into how they have been as a franchise as a whole, if that makes any kind of sense. And also, I'm going to define, at least in my opinion, what makes a franchise irrelevant or not. And in all actuality, it's pretty simple. They have to, I ask myself these three questions right here. Number one, have they at least made the playoffs or have had playoff success in the last 5 years? And I'm just going to say, in this case, since 2020, since basically 2024 is over with. So I'm going to go by from 2020 till now. Okay. So, number one, have they had playoff success in the last 5 years, or have they at least made the playoffs in the last 5 years? Number two, how's the ownership and how's the front office with them going? And finally, number three, are they at least a good team? So those are the three questions that I ask myself when determining if a franchise is irrelevant or not. And if at least the answer to at least two of these questions are no, then to me, I've identified an irrelevant team. So I have all the teams right down here. I made it into a tier maker. And I'm also going to do the same thing as far as the NFL goes, but I'm going to wait until after the Super Bowl is over with because I want to be as up to date with that as possible, as this is going into the 2025 season for the MLB. So without further ado, I'm going to rank every MLB franchise by their relevancy or their irrelevancy. And I have tiers right here. Obviously, at the top, you got the well-ran franchises right here that are, in my opinion, generally well-ran, and they are far from irrelevant. Then you got a slight notch below them in good, which they are, they are a good franchise, but they do have a couple things against them, but still, they're not irrelevant. Then I have mid. And what this means to me is that they're neither terrible nor great, but I wouldn't go as far to say that they're irrelevant. They're just very mediocre. Then you got bad. Then you got, these are teams that are straight up bad, but they're not quite irrelevant. Then you got teams that are borderline irrelevant. And what I mean by that is that they're like maybe one bad season away from being irrelevant. And then, of course, you got bottom of the barrel irrelevant franchises. So let's get on to it. This is every MLB team ranked by their relevancy. And if you guys know me, I'm a Pirates fan, and I'm just going to get this out of the way right now. The Pittsburgh Pirates are irrelevant. I mean, haven't made the playoffs since 2015, haven't even won a playoff game since 2013, haven't won a division title since 1992, and they consistently finish last place in the division, and they have by far the worst owner in all of baseball. Yes, I said it. Argue with me all you want. Bob Nutting's the worst owner in all of baseball. So yeah, that's a no-brainer right there. Pirates are absolutely irrelevant. Now I'm just going to go team by team here. We got the Los Angeles Angels. The Angels, well, let's go by the criteria. Have they had playoff success in the last 5 years? Well, the Angels, that's a definite no right there. The Angels haven't made the playoffs since 2014. So that means they haven't won a playoff game since at least then. I believe the Angels currently have the longest playoff win drought in the MLB. I think the last time they won a playoff game was 2009. So that's a definite no right there. Ownership, terrible. I mean, they have a generational talent in Mike Trout. They lost Shohei Ohtani last year. So that should tell you all you need to know about the Angels right there. And they're not even a good team. So the Angels are definitely an irrelevant as well. Now, where would I put them? I would put them a little bit below I would put them, a little bit below the Pirates, because the only thing that's making me put the Bucks above them is that the Bucks have a more recent playoff win than them. So yeah, I'm going to say the Angels definitely are irrelevant. Then you got the Houston Astros. Yeah, where do you think I'm putting them? I'm putting them in well ran. Astros have won 2 World Series since 2017. They have won the AL West, I believe, every year except 2020 since 2017, which 2020 I hardly count for any team really. But still, the Astros, they are, in my opinion, they're the cream of the crop in the American League until someone truly knocks them off their high horse. So yeah, the Astros are definitely in well ran right now. The Las Vegas A's, I'm going to start calling them that. I refuse to call them just the Athletics. So, again, criteria. The A's, playoff success or playoff appearances in the last 5 years. It may be hard to believe, but yes, the A's, last time they made the playoffs was 2020. So, that's barely a yes for the A's right now. Barely. Like, if the A's missed the playoffs in 2025, that would be a no. But it's going into 2025 right now, so that's barely yes right now for the A's. The front office, I think it speaks volumes about how poorly ran the A's are, considering that they are moving to Vegas at the end of the decade. They're playing in Sacramento for the meantime, and they just keep on losing most of their core contributors. So I just think that speaks volumes about how outdated their front office is. So that's a no for the A's right there. And they are not a good team. So I don't think I'm ready to call the A's irrelevant yet, just because they have that playoff appearance in 2020. I'm going to call them borderline irrelevant for right now. I mean, we all know they're bad, but they're starting to get bad to the point to where no one really even, recognizes them as a true threat. So for right now, I'm putting the A's in borderline irrelevant. Like, literally, if they have another losing season in 2025, which I have no doubt will be the case, the A's are going to go in, or the A's are going right here. But for right now, I'm putting them at borderline irrelevant. Toronto Blue Jays. This is a tricky one because, yes, the Blue Jays have made the playoffs in the last 5 years, but they had that massive choke job against the Mariners. So that's a yes for Toronto right now. Front office, I'm not in love with Toronto's front office because they are a front office that at least tries to be competitive. They at least try to build up a good team, but I just don't think that they really bring in the best players that fill in their needs, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, at least Toronto does know how to put up, they do know how to build up a decent farm and a decent core. But I do give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because they do have to go up against 2 big market teams every year in their division. So I'm going to say undetermined for Toronto's front office. And then are they at least a good team? Toronto had a bad year in 2024. And then before that, they were constantly in the loop. So I'm just going to call the Blue Jays a mediocre team. And I think mediocre front offices equal mediocre results. So I am putting the Blue Jays in mid. They're not, like I said, they're not irrelevant. But they're not terrible and they're not great either. So it's just a hard one to decipher. I'm going to put the Blue Jays in mid for right now. Atlanta Braves. The Atlanta Braves, to me, I am putting them in well ran, and I am putting them slightly below the Astros. The Braves won the World Series about 3-4 years ago in 2021, and they're consistent, and they've been a consistent playoff team since 2018. They had that they had that painful rebuild they had to endure before that, but I say it's worked out pretty well for them. Atlanta's constantly in the mix. They're constantly a contender. The front office pushes all the right buttons. They constantly build up a good team. So I think that says a lot about where the Braves are right now. I am putting them in well ran. Milwaukee Brewers. This is a tricky one because obviously, yes, the Brewers have had playoff success. I think they've made the playoffs every year this decade so far. But they kind of made it by default because the NL Central is a pretty weak division. But still, going to the playoffs is going to the playoffs. So there you go with that for Milwaukee. Front office, I think the Brewers do have a decent enough front office. And are they at least a good team? Like I said, they are a good team, but it's kind of by default. So I think literally the only thing that's holding the Brewers back from being well ran is them having a World Series title. Like literally, if the Brewers either win a World Series or at least go to one in the next couple years, I would put them in well ran. But I am actually going to put them in good. Like I said, to me, they just miss out on well ran because, you know, what are they going to do if the core that they have right now just starts to fall off? And how's the front office going to handle that? So, like I said, to me, they're definitely not irrelevant, but they're good. And the reason I put them in good is because I do question, I have a question or two about them. That's basically what good means. It's just a slight notch below well ran. Whereas well ran, I have like no questions about these guys. In good, I may have a question or two about them. So I am going to put the Brewers in good. The St. Louis Cardinals. If you guys know me, I absolutely can't stand the Cardinals, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't say it. The Cardinals are going in well ran, and I am putting them behind the Atlanta Braves. The story with St. Louis. I mean, they're always competitive. At least most of the time they are. They're most of the time in the playoff picture. You can always count on them to have a good front office. You can always count on them to have a good farm. They're one of the few small market teams that's successful without spending a whole lot of money. Yeah, I hate the Cardinals, but I'd be lying if I didn't say they are a very well-ran franchise. They have made the playoffs this decade. They made it in 2020, 2021, and 2022, and then they've missed the playoffs the last 2 years, but still, I mean, the Cardinals are well-ran. I mean, they got Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt. That should tell you enough about how the front office is. So, yeah, St. Louis is going in well ran. Like, if this was a decade ago, the Cardinals would definitely be above Houston and Atlanta. But because those two have had more success than the Cardinals lately, that's why I put them in bottom tier well ran. So, there you go. Chicago Cubs. Again, this is another team I can't stand, but the Cubs are tricky because they did win the World Series in 2016, and they had that window from 2015 to 2020 where they were making the playoffs consistently and they had a good team. But then ever since their retooling stint in 2021, the Cubs have not really been the same team. In fact, I think they haven't made the playoffs since 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So there you go right there with number one for the Cubs. But it's not to say that their front office is bad. because at least their front office knows what they're doing with retooling, and they know what they're doing as far as building up a competitive team goes. Because, like I said, they got that title in 2016, but I'm judging by how the Cubs have been over the last 5 years. And then, obviously, to me, the Cubs are a decent team. They're not, they're not great, but they're not mid either. To me, they're a decent enough team. And I do give the Cubs a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because the NL's gotten tougher as the years have gone by. So I say the Cubs are also in good, and I put them below Milwaukee because, the Cubs, I think they just need to make the playoffs again, and then they can be potentially ahead of Milwaukee, despite them having a World Series, which is something the Brewers don't have. I'm going to put the Cubs in good. I think they barely miss out on tier, like on the mid tier. If this was the start of 2020, the Cubs would definitely be in well ran. But for right now, I'm going to put them in good. Arizona Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks. So a couple years ago, Arizona was losing 110 games, and it looked like they'd be at the bottom of the barrel as far as their relevancy would go. So if this was in 2022, the Diamondbacks would definitely be in irrelevant. But it's 3 years later, and Arizona has put together some decent teams, and they've even made the playoffs since then. So that's a yes for Arizona right there. And I think it speaks volumes about their front office as well. I mean, they just landed Corbin Burnes as I'm recording this video right now. They just landed Corbin Burnes. So there you go with Arizona right there. And I want to put them in well ran. I even want to put them in good, but my questions with Arizona is that when they barely missed the playoffs this past season, are they going to come back and build off of that? Or are they going to miss out again? And like I said, I think with them getting Corbin Burnes, it shows that they're at least trying. But I don't know if I'm ready to call them a good team just yet. Even though they did make the World Series in 2023, it was kind of, that was just a Cinderella team. I'm going to put Arizona in mid, just above Toronto, because I kind of question the state of them right now. They're definitely not terrible, and I definitely wouldn't call them great either. I would call them decent, but I think that they barely miss out on being a good team. Like, that could definitely change for the Diamondbacks if they make the playoffs this year. But I'm going to put Arizona in mid for right now because I just question where they are. LA Dodgers, yeah, this is a no-brainer. They're definitely going in well ran. I mean, they just won their second World Series this decade, and they constantly win the NL West. They have the highest payroll in baseball. They bring in just about every superstar known to man. Yeah, this is a no-brainer. Dodgers are definitely well ran. No-brainer there. San Francisco Giants. This is kind of a tricky one as well because remember in 2021, the Giants had that 107 win season and they lost in the division series. But so, I mean, that's a yes for the Giants right now. But then ever since then, they've just been floating in mediocrity since then, you know, like they're okay, but they're not great either. I don't know. The Giants are a tricky one. They really are. I really don't know how to decipher it. I suppose I can give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because after that 2021 season, Buster Posey retired, and he's been a staple of the franchise for over a decade. And it's hard to replace a franchise icon like that. It's hard to move on from a franchise icon like that. I think that kind of says how they are as far as the front office goes. I think they have a definite yes with the playoffs, but like I said, how's the front office and are they at least good? To me, that's up for grabs. I'm going to put the Giants in mid, and I put them slightly above Toronto because the reason I put them above Toronto is because the Giants, you have a little, like I said, you have a little bit of the benefit of the doubt for them. Whereas the Blue Jays, they have an identity, but they just can't seem to get back to the playoffs. So that's why I put the Giants in mid. They're just kind of they're hard to figure out. Cleveland Guardians. I am actually going to put the Guardians in well ran, and I put them below St. Louis. To me, the Guardians are low tier, well ran, high tier, good. And the reason for that is because, like the Cardinals, Cleveland is one of those small market teams that actually runs their franchise very well. They're a very well ran small market franchise. They constantly have a good farm. They gave Jose Ramirez all that money. And even when they lose a superstar player, they are able to replenish on that because they develop their players in the farm very well. So there you go with Cleveland right there. And they're constantly in the playoffs. I mean, to me, what the Guardians are starting to remind me of are the 2010s Giants minus the World Series title. Because remember, in the 2020s, the Giants, they went from 2010 to 14, making the playoffs those for 3 years and winning the World Series all 3 times they were in the playoffs. That's what the Guardians are starting to remind me of, except they don't have a World Series title. So I'm going to say the Guardians are in well ran. I think they are a very well ran franchise. You know, they won their second AL Central title since 2022. And they won it again in 2020. And then they had those couple down years in 21 and 23. But yeah, you know, I think Stephen Vogt's done a great job replacing Terry Francona. So that's why I put Cleveland in well ran. To me, they're, like I said, they're low tier, well ran, high tier, good. But I think they just make it to well ran because I really don't question their front office the way that I question Milwaukee's, you know. So I'm going to put Cleveland in well ran. I mean, they haven't Cleveland hasn't finished last since I think the 90s, and they've never finished last in the AL Central. So that's why I put them above Milwaukee. Seattle Mariners, again, this is another tricky one because Seattle finally made the playoffs for the first time in 2022 since that 2001 season. So that's a yes for Seattle. But is their front office good with all that being said? And are they at least a good team? That's where I question them. You know, Seattle's missed the playoffs the past 2 seasons, and while I definitely don't think that they're a bad team, I really can't say if they're a great team either. So, you know, they had that amazing comeback against Toronto and then they got swept by Houston. I am going to put the Mariners in mid. That's where I put Seattle right now. I put them above Toronto because, like I said, their playoff success came against the Blue Jays. So that's why I put the Mariners in mid for right now. They're another team that's hard to decipher. Miami Marlins, again, this is a no-brainer. To me, the Marlins are irrelevant, and I put them above the Pirates because Miami, yes, they have made the playoffs twice this decade, if you can believe that, 2020 and 2022, or 2020 and 2023. But the Marlins, they made the playoffs by total accident. Like I said, I hardly count anything for 2020. And then they were a complete default playoff team in 2023. And then, of course, they had the second worst record in baseball this past season. And then they also just have been bad over the decade and decades as well. They do not have a good front office and they do not have a good team. You know, it seems like that rebuild for the Marlins has just really been, you know, a mirage. So I'm putting the Marlins in irrelevant. New York Mets. The Mets, yes, they have made the playoffs over the last 5 years. They were just in the NLCS, actually. So that's a yes for the Mets right there. Front office. I think the Mets have a decent front office, despite what people will tell you with them saying low Mets. I think the Mets have a decent enough front office. I think they field a competitive team most years. And I think it speaks volume that the front office, because they field those teams and because they build on their teams, they're able to have a good team. So, yeah, the Mets, they are, to me, I'm putting them in good. And I'm going to put them a little bit above the Cubs. I put them above the Cubs, below the Brewers, because I think the Mets have been more consistent than the Cubs, but they haven't been as consistent as the Brewers. So, yeah, the Mets, they are definitely a good team in my opinion. So, there you go with the Mets right there. Washington Nationals, the Nationals are irrelevant. They have not made the playoffs since winning the World Series in 2019, and they are in a full-fledged rebuild. I mean, they sold at the deadline. That should say enough about how the Nats are right now. So, they are definitely irrelevant. And I'm putting them a little bit below Miami because the Marlins have made the playoffs more recently than the Nats have. And I put them above the Pirates and the Angels because, like I said, the Nationals have more playoff appearances recently than those two. And that's why I'm putting the Nationals in irrelevant. Like, imagine saying this 5 years ago about the Nats because they were the defending champs. So, yeah, I'm going to put the Nationals in irrelevant. Baltimore Orioles. Well, remember the Orioles, they had that stretch where they were the worst team in baseball. But ever since then, the Orioles have fielded a really good team. A lot of people say that they're the best team and that they're the most complete team in baseball. But the thing that's holding the Orioles back is some playoff success. Like, yeah, they've made the playoffs the past couple seasons, but they have failed to win a single playoff game. So Baltimore still has not won a playoff game in a decade. That's it's pretty hard to believe considering the very good team that they built up there. And I think it speaks volumes on their front office and how they've recovered from that rebuild and how they have fielded a really good team. So, yeah, the Orioles, I'm going to put them in good. And I'm going to put them a little bit above I'm putting them slightly above the Chicago Cubs because the Orioles have made the playoffs more recently than the Cubs, but the Mets and the Brewers have been in the playoffs and they've had more playoff success than them over the past couple years. But yeah, Baltimore, to me, they are good. And like, definitely if we were going into 2022, the Orioles would definitely be all the way down here and irrelevant, but amazing what a 3-year run can make. I am putting the Orioles in good. San Diego Padres. The Padres. Well, the Padres have been really good this decade. They've made the playoffs, I believe, in 2020, 2022 through 2024. I think the only time San Diego has missed the playoffs was 2021. And that was because in 2021, the Padres had a lot of injuries that season. So there you go right there with San Diego. That's a definite yes as far as the playoffs have gone. And the fact that they have fielded that many good teams and the fact that they have fielded that playoff success and even made it to the NLCS, that should say a lot on how the Padres are. So they definitely have some good teams. I'm going to put the Padres in good. I think they just miss out on being well ran, and I am going to put them above the Brewers because, see, unlike because the Brewers, they've had the benefit of a weak NL Central. The Padres constantly have to compete with the Dodgers, and the Padres even beat the Dodgers in the playoffs. So I think that gives San Diego bonus points right there, and that's why I put them above Milwaukee and the Mets. And the only thing that really makes me miss out on putting the Padres in well ran is them lacking a World Series title. Kind of the same as the Brewers. I just think the Padres are more defined than them at this point. So that's why I put the Padres in very high tier good. They just miss out on being well ran, in my opinion. Philadelphia Phillies. The Phillies, they're another good team, and I put them a little bit below the Mets, and I put them above Baltimore and Chicago because the Phillies, they're another team that has rebounded well from a rebuild. Philly was rebuilding a couple years ago, and now they have built up a solid team that's made the NLCS in 2 of the past 3 seasons, I believe. So that should say a lot on Philly right there, but they do have they do have that embarrassing playoff loss to the Mets, and that's why I put the Mets slightly above the Phillies because the Mets have beaten the Phillies in the playoffs, and they have also the Mets have also had a little bit more playoff success recently than the Phillies have. But still, the Phillies, they built up a really good team. Like I said, these teams are in the good, slightly below well ran, because I do question some characteristics about them. And the thing I question about the Phillies is if they were to play the Mets again, and if they were to play teams like Chicago, Milwaukee, and San Diego, how would they fare against them? Well, the Phillies did beat the Padres, so there you go right there. But you see, that's where it comes in. How would they do against the Mets? How would they do against the Brewers? So that's why I put that's why I put Philadelphia in good for right now. Texas Rangers. Well, the Rangers won the World Series in 2023. Can you believe that? But outside of that, the Rangers have been a pretty bad team. Like, they missed the playoffs this past year, and then they've also been bottom of the barrel most years in the MLB as well. So, yeah, I'm actually going to put Texas in bad. They're my first bad team as far as the last 5 years go. They had that World Series title, but overall, Texas, they're just not very good. I would not call them I would not put them in the irrelevant category just yet. Like, if Texas has a couple more bad years, they could join the A's right here. But for right now, I'm putting Texas in bad. This is just not a good team, in my opinion. They had a fluke World Series title. Tampa Bay Rays. Well, the Rays, they're another small market franchise that's decently ran. The Rays have made the playoffs a fair amount of times this decade. I think they've made it every year except 2024. So that's an easy yes for Tampa Bay right there. Front office, like I said, Tampa is a small market team. So you do give them a little bit of some slack right there, because with them competing with 2 big markets in New York and Boston, they hold their own pretty well. So there you go with Tampa right there. And I wouldn't call the Rays a flashy team, but they are definitely competitive enough to make things interesting in the American League. So, where do I put Tampa? I am going to put Tampa in well ran. Yeah, I'm going to put the Rays in well ran. I mean, they're small market. And I would normally put them in good because, like I said, I don't think they're consistent. I wouldn't call them consistently a good team. But Tampa, you got to remember the Rays have made the World Series over San Diego. And like I said about these teams right here, most of these teams, the only thing that's preventing me from putting them in good, well ran, is if they have either competed in a World Series or they have won one. Tampa Bay made the World Series in 2020. Like I said, I don't really count anything for 2020, but still, they made it all the way there. And the Rays have only missed the playoffs one time, and it's because they had a down year in 2024. So, yeah, I think Tampa has what these teams are lacking right now. I mean, Philly, yeah, they did make the World Series a couple years ago, but I put Tampa above Philly because Tampa has just been more consistent than Philly has. And like I said, I question where Philly is. And the reason I put Tampa below Cleveland and St. Louis is because the Rays, is because St. Louis and Cleveland, you can pretty much bank on them being competitive most years, where Tampa just had a down year. And if the Rays have another down year, I can knock them down another tier to being good. But for right now, I'm going to put Tampa and well ran. To me, they are very low tier, well ran, high tier, good, right there with Cleveland. And plus, Cleveland beat them in the playoffs in 2022. Boston Red Sox, this is another challenging one because Boston, they've only made the playoffs once this decade, and that was in 2021. So that's barely yes for Boston right there. And then you also got to take a look at the front office and how their team is. Well, Boston did manage to keep it competitive this year, but they missed the playoffs. But before that, they were just floating around in mediocrity. This is a tough one for Boston. I want to put them in mid, but I am actually going to put the Red Sox in bad. I don't think the Red Sox are a good team. And the reason I put them in bad is because I think Toronto is a little bit more consistent than Boston is. And I put them below Texas because Texas does have that World Series title, but it was by a fluke. Boston hasn't made the playoffs in 4 years, and this has to be a big year for the Boston Red Sox. Like, if they miss the playoffs, I can easily keep them in bad, and I can probably take them up to high tier mid as far as their relevancy goes. But I mean, Boston, they're never going to truly be irrelevant. But yeah, the fact that like I said, they're never going to truly be irrelevant, but they're just not a good team right now. So I'm going to put Boston bad. Not irrelevant, but they're a bad team. Cincinnati Reds. I am putting the Reds in borderline irrelevant, and I am putting them slightly below the A's. And for a simple reason. The Reds, they have not made the playoffs since 2020. And if the Reds miss the playoffs again in 2025, they can easily be knocked down here to irrelevant. And the Reds are constantly plagued by cheap ownership. And despite them having a somewhat good team, it's just that it's covered up by their front office and their ownership just not being very good. So, yeah, like the Reds, to me, they're on the same level as the A's. They are like one more bad year away from being knocked down to irrelevant. So, yeah, the Reds, to me, they're a poorly ran franchise, and they are in danger. They're like endangered to become irrelevant. So that's where I put the Reds right now. Colorado Rockies absolutely are irrelevant, and I am putting them slightly above the Nationals, or no, slightly below the Nationals, and slightly above the Pirates and the Angels. As a matter of fact, let me just do this right here. If you simply move the Pirates over, or you move the Angels and swap places with the Pirates, this here spells exactly what these three franchises are. Crap. You see? That's what these three franchises right here are. They are crap. But all kidding aside, Rockies are irrelevant. They haven't made the playoffs since 2018. Their front office is just in shambles, and that says a lot about their team. They lost a generational talent, but before that, the Rockies weren't really any good either. So, yeah, the Rockies, the reason I put them below Washington is because the Nats do have a World Series title, but they also have a less recent playoff appearance than the Nationals do. So I am putting the Rockies in irrelevant. Kansas City Royals, if we were going into 2024, there wouldn't be a question where the Royals would be. They would definitely be irrelevant. But Kansas City had a really good 2024. They made the playoffs, and I believe they won the wild. Yeah, they beat Baltimore in the wild card, and then they lost to the Yankees in the divisional. But overall, considering what Kansas City has been ever since they won the World Series, that is a really good breath of fresh air for Royals fans. They have a reason to be excited about them again. So, yeah, great rebuild by Kansas City. Bobby Witt's a really good player for them. But, you got to know they're a small market team, so they don't get a whole lot of attention the way that big market teams do. But overall, Kansas City, right now, I am going to put them in mid, and I am going to put them slightly below Arizona because the Diamondbacks have that World Series appearance where Kansas City made the playoffs for the first time in a decade. And I put them above the Giants because they have a more recent playoff appearance than the Giants and the Mariners and Blue Jays for that matter. But I don't know if I'm fully ready to call Kansas City a good team just yet, but they are anything but irrelevant in my opinion for right now. But yeah, Kansas City, I am putting them in mid for right now. They have the potential to go up to good, barring what they do in 2025. But for right now, I'm calling Kansas City mid. Detroit Tigers, I think they are right there with the Royals in mid. And the reason that I put Detroit slightly below Kansas City is because the Tigers, they had that magical run to close out the season, and they took out the Astros in the playoffs while they also took Cleveland to the brink in the division series. But this was also a season where Detroit was kind of, a lot of people were like, the Tigers can win the division because the AL Central's weak, or Detroit can make it because they've truly improved. You see, that's where I question Detroit. With Kansas City, I think the Royals have more of an identity than the Tigers do, whereas Detroit, it was like, okay, was the run that they had in 2024 a fluke, or have they truly turned it around? Like, fluky runs like that happen all the time in baseball, and that's why I question the Tigers, but I am putting them in mid for right now, you know? So, there you go with Detroit right there. Minnesota Twins. I am going to put the Twins in good. They are not irrelevant, and I am putting them above the Cubs a little bit because the Twins, they have made the playoffs over the past decade, over the past 5 years. They usually have a decent enough team, and their front office tries to keep them in the loop, but the Twins, they just have really bad playoff luck, Like going into 2023, they hadn't won a playoff game in over 20 years. Like that says a lot for the Twins right there. But I don't think Minnesota's irrelevant. I think they're a good team, but I do question if they're able to be consistently good enough. But the reason they miss mid for me is because, like I said, consistency over these teams. But that's why I put the Twins in good. They're low tier good, high tier mid, in my opinion. Chicago White Sox, irrelevant. To me, they are right there with the Marlins. I put them slightly below them because the 41 and 121ers, they have not made the playoffs since 2021, and they haven't even been good since then either. And it doesn't look like it's getting any better for the White Sox. They are 100% irrelevant with that random ass playoff appearance they had in 2021. And finally, New York Yankees, no doubt about it, are well ran. I put them slightly below Atlanta because the Yankees, they made the World Series and they lost. But to me, they've been more consistent than St. Louis, Cleveland, and Tampa. The Yankees are never going to be irrelevant, okay? I mean, that's just how it is. The Yankees, they're a well-ran team. Hal Steinbrenner does what he can usually to bring in the superstars like the Dodgers do. And even though Yankee fans are irate at it, the fact is they're never going to be irrelevant. So that's why Yankees, again, no doubt about it, are well-ran. So there you go. There you go. In my opinion, this is how every MLB team is as far as their relevancy goes. You got the cream of the crops in the Dodgers, Astros, Braves, Yankees. And then you got teams that are well ran, but they have potential to be a little bit further, like the Cardinals, Guardians, and Rays. And then you got the all around good enough to decent teams that are not irrelevant, but they're usually in the loop of the playoffs, or they have been making the playoffs lately. The teams like San Diego, Milwaukee, the Mets, the Phillies, the Orioles, the Twins, and the Cubs. Then you got teams that are just hard to figure out. You got the Diamondbacks, the Royals, the Tigers, the Giants, the Mariners, and the Blue Jays. To me, the straight up bad teams, in my opinion, at least going into 2025, are Texas and Boston. Then you got two teams that are very close to becoming at the bottom of the barrel in the Athletics and Reds. And then, of course, you got the bottom of the barrel, the Marlins, White Sox, Nationals, Rockies, Pirates, and the Angels. So, yeah, there you go. Where do you guys think that a team should be a notch or two below or a notch or two higher? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And I'll do this for the NFL as soon as the Super Bowl is over with. But yeah, I wanted to get this out about baseball, man. Let me know what you think down in the comments below.